Let's talk to Kathryn Porter, who's an independent energy analyst, because a couple of stories have come across our desk this week, not only about the energy problems in this country and the reliance that we still have to have on gas and fossil fuels because of the way that renewables don't work terribly well. There's been all sorts of risks of blackouts. At the moment, I think we're looking at something like more than 50% of our energy right now at this very moment on the grid coming from gas. Let's find out from Kathryn how close we came to actual blackouts. Kathryn, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
So, people are saying in the papers this morning we're going back to the 70s. You probably don't remember the 70s, but I do. And I remember sitting around almost every night of the week with my parents with candles. We were allowed to have 1 hour of electricity a night to make dinner. And then for the rest of the night, we just had candles. And we had 1 hour in the morning as well. So it can happen. How close did we get to it this week?
Actually, on Wednesday, we came very close, probably closer than we have in the last 15 years. The spare margin that the system operator is required to hold for just-in-case situations fell to extremely low levels. And really, we only needed one power station to trip off, and that could have been enough to make the difference.
Goodness.
And what's really worrying is that 3 hours after the demand peak, 2 big power stations tripped off simultaneously. If that had happened 3 hours earlier, I think it would have been almost certain that we would have had at least what they call demand control, which is selected blackouts or even a full countrywide blackout. It was extremely tight.
And so if they have to make those decisions, what do they base those decisions on? If they had to say, right, well, we're going to black out, I don't know, parts of East Yorkshire or parts of, London, or how do they make those decisions?
So there's actually a whole established process for this that I have to say I haven't looked at recently, but the country's divided up into blocks, and there's a scheme where if there was enough time to make the decision, because obviously if things just happen and break the way they did in 2019, then it just happens. Right. But if it's done deliberately, there's a scheme and it rotates, and you'd be off for 4 hours and they try and give you some notice. Right. So it's all set out. There's not somebody sitting in the control room going, I think we'll switch off Birmingham. Right. It's actually all sort of pre-planned.
There is a plan, yeah. But it is pretty terrifying, isn't it, that we came as close as we did? And, I mean, is there anything that we can currently do about that? We still seem to be quite reliant upon bringing in gas from outside of the UK. We ship it in from Qatar, I think. We've got energy coming in from the United States of America as well in various different forms. I think we get some shale gas from there. We get some of those wood chips as well. I mean, the government keep telling us we're going to have energy security because we're going to have our own homegrown energy, but that doesn't seem to be quite what's happening.
Well, and it's also a lie, unfortunately, because the strategy is to rely on renewables based in the UK, but also to rely on electricity imports from the continent. So there's no strategy to actually be energy independent. The net zero transition strategy is to have this combination of renewables, storage, and imports of electricity. If we wanted to be more resilient, we should increase our production of oil and gas in the North Sea. Right. And actually, what happened on Wednesday, although we were using a lot of gas, it didn't have anything to do with gas security. We had plenty of gas. There was no concern about the access to gas itself. The concern was over access to power stations. And this is the big concern as well, that the plan for Clean Power 2030 is to put the entire existing gas generation fleet into reserve. So it will only run for a small number of hours and generate only 5% of the average annual electricity need. Now, gas power stations don't like operating on that basis. Businesses would have to make investments to be able to run their power stations like that. And a lot of the fleet was built in the late 90s and early 2000s. So they're coming to the end of life. They normally operate for about 25 to 30 years. Right. I think it's extremely unlikely that these businesses are going to be willing to make the investments in end-of-life assets to keep them available for that sort of usage. Yeah. So actually what we need to do to keep the lights on to 2030 is build more gas power stations. Yeah. There's almost nothing else that we can do at this point to ensure security of supply.
Yeah, instead we've got Ed Miliband rolling around telling us all that he wants to rip out the gas boiler in the house and put a heat pump in for which you'll have to pay several £1,000s. And Donald Trump has got involved as well. He's come out and said, that Britain's wrong to halt all the oil and gas exploration in the North Sea.
Yeah, and he's correct in that. What he's saying is a pretty orthodox view, which is that cheap energy leads to economic growth. And he just disagrees with a lot of European policymakers and the Biden administration on this narrative that renewables are cheap. Renewables are not cheap. They give you a lower wholesale price of electricity, that's true, but consumers don't just pay the wholesale price of electricity. They pay that plus a lot of other costs. And the more renewables you have, the more those other costs go up. So if you look at end user bills, household bills, in the period from 2000 up to 2019, so before the Ukraine war and COVID and the gas crisis, you will see that wholesale prices just went sideways. They didn't go up. But domestic bills went up a lot. And that was completely because of the energy transition. It was because we're paying billions of pounds a year in subsidies. You need a lot more grid connection if you're going to have renewables because they have low energy density. You have to pay backup generation to be available when the renewables aren't available, like we had on Wednesday. And managing the real-time supply and demand balance, because renewables are very variable. Every gust of wind and cloud makes a difference, and the grid is quite sensitive to those changes. So we're paying billions of pounds more a year in what we call balancing costs. All of that is because of this transition plan to net zero. A more sensible strategy would be to rely on nuclear. It would avoid a lot of those extra costs.
Absolutely. Kathryn, what a sensible person you are. Most sensible person I've spoken to all day, I think. Independent energy analyst. We must talk to you more. Thank you very much indeed. Who knew Labour's energy policy is a lie, according to Kathryn?